Hey Statists, we've got some questions for you. If a kid couldn't afford lunch because the school bullies kept taking a percentage of his allowance, you wouldn't blame the kid's parents for not giving him enough. So why is it that when people struggle financially, you blame the employer who provides them with money and not the government which is taxing them?
For fans of democracy, I would ask, is it okay to forcibly rob, control, or otherwise victimize somebody as long as the majority approves of it?
We all know that every economic system has market failures. Capitalism, socialism, communism, whatever. But my question is, why do you feel morally justified in forcing other people to subsidize these failures? Why should I be forced to subsidize failed electric car companies like Fisker or failed government initiatives like Obamacare? Shouldn't I have the right to decide what risk I want to take with my own money?
How come you want to ban things that you don't like? As long as they're not hurting other people, what's the big deal?
Statists of the left, who are always talking about how government's going to help the poor and demarginalize marginalized groups. I don't understand this. From the ancient world through the Middle Ages all the way up to modern times, governments have largely conspired against the poor. I'm thinking in particular a century ago with eugenics programs and segregation programs and zoning programs, business regulation and union rules. Everything was designed to exclude, marginalize, and impoverish groups that didn't have power. Governments are always controlled by rich people. That's just the way it works. Why do you think the government is the right means to help the poor? It makes no sense to me.
So I punched this commie face in and said, "How do you like those marks?" Oh, we're recording? Does my hair look okay? How can you claim on one hand to be anti-guns, yet on the other hand, you want the state to take guns away at gunpoint? Pew pew.
Government has slaughtered 250 million of its own people in acts of democide. How can you trust such a beast to rule over you? And as some of you argue for, to be disarmed too.
Why is it that no matter how much money the government takes from its citizens, it's always broke?
If keeping 100% of someone else's income is slavery, then at what percentage is it no longer slavery?
Do you know the difference between capitalism and corporatism? If so, please explain. And if not, why do you falsely demonize something or equate the two as the exact same thing if you don't even understand what it is?
Can a bunch of people who don't have the right to do a certain thing grant to somebody else the right to do it? And if not, how did Congress acquire the right to do things that you and I don't have the right to do?
Why are you comfortable spending borrowed money knowing your children will have to pay it off down the line? You're increasing their eventual taxes before they can even vote. Isn't that the definition of taxation without representation?
If people are so f***ing greedy and selfish that we need governments to steal from the rich and give to the poor and needy, then why do over 1.5 million charities exist globally, with $373 billion being raised in 2015 alone? And that's not including the Clinton Foundation's money laundering operation. Alleged money laundering operation.
You do realize that making something illegal won't make it go away. Guns, drugs, the black market will provide.
Here's some of the money government wasted. The government spent $1.4 million on an app that just simply points left and right for the TSA. That should have been done for way cheaper. Oh, that's not crazy enough for you? How about this? The government wasted $1.4 trillion on a jet that doesn't even work. That's enough to buy every homeless person in the United States a mansion. A $600,000 home. Oh, that's not crazy enough for you. The government lost $6 trillion. Knowing all of this, do you still think the government can spend your money more wisely than you can?
How can you rationalize basic philosophical concepts such as the non-aggression principle as being quote-unquote too difficult for society to be educated on and abide by, yet believe that hundreds of thousands of pages of federal and state regulations, clauses, case files, and amendments are somehow easier?
If it's wrong for you to do a certain thing, can you, by voting, make it right for someone else to do the exact same thing?
If the competitive market ingenuity of capitalism can deliver us things like iPhones, 3D printers, and private spaceships, why should services as important as justice, roads, and defense be monopolized by the state?
Right-wing statists. When you're opposing gun laws, you argue the government shouldn't be so powerful that it can disarm the populace. So why, when it comes to drug laws, do you argue the government should be so powerful that it can tell people what they can put into their own bodies?
Now, to statists of the right, claim you're opposed to socialism and don't see government as the answer, and yet invariably you're celebrating the cops, the first responders, and the fire departments, and the jails, war, all big public sector programs. It's a kind of the socialism that you love. Why do you think that that's going to work better than the private sector?
If people are innately good, what is the need for government? And if people are innately evil, what is to stop them using government to cause evil to one another? And would it not be better that their influence be limited to that which they can achieve voluntarily, rather than to give them the added benefit of legitimised force?
Left-wing statists. When you're opposing drug laws, especially weed, you argue the government shouldn't be so powerful that it can tell people what they can and can't put into their own bodies. So why, when it comes to gun laws, do you think the government should be so powerful that it can have a complete monopoly over effective force?
Here are the things you can't do without government permission. Build a house, drive a car, own a gun, go fishing, collect rainwater, hunt, cross the road, get married, leave the country, start a business, fly on a commercial plane, take drugs, work. It's actually hard to think of something that doesn't require government permission. Knowing this, how can you say you're free?
If being a democratically elected constitutional republic creates legitimate political authority, does that mean that all the things that were done by the democratically elected constitutional republics of the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, and North Korea, all those things were legitimate and justified?
History shows us that governments, regardless of how they have been set up to function, always end up failing and collapsing. Rather it be a republic, a democracy, an empire, or even a dictatorship. We always see these governments collapse inevitably, regardless of how powerful or how wealthy these governments were. My question is to you, why do you believe that your government, or your state for this matter, will be any different or even any more successful than these governments from history that have inevitably collapsed?
If you're a proud, government-loving liberal who champions personal choice, could you please explain why I can't choose to not fund the murder of innocent children abroad?
You really want the same people who run the DMV to be in charge of your health care?
Why is it that you prefer anti-discrimination laws which force those who hate other races to hide that prejudice and make money off of those other races, to a system where they could be open about said prejudice and lose money?
You guys often say that libertarians have too much faith in the goodness of people. Why then do you, in the same breath, argue that I give up my right to bear arms and entrust my personal safety to police in gun-free zones? That seems like pretty strong faith in human nature to me.
Statist, since the war on drugs has been an absolute failure, what makes you think a war on guns would be any different?
Can you morally justify the federal government preventing a small territory from seceding from a larger country?
How is me writing down "I'm in charge" and then getting 20 friends to sign it any different from the drafting of the Constitution?
This is a question I have for any statist, rather they be left or right. Why are your age of consent laws so inconsistent? Now, most of your laws are already pretty laughable, but age of consent laws are probably the biggest joke of all. First off, why can no state across the country, or even the world for that matter, come up with a reliable age of consent? However, in some cases, why is it that I only need to be 18 to buy a pack of cigarettes, something which kills more people than guns? However, I need to be 21 to buy alcohol. And in other ludicrous cases, why do I need to be 18 to buy a rated R movie, or even 18 to buy a rated M video game which says 17 and up? And if so, why do I need to be 18 even though it says these are for 17 and up people? And even then, why do you believe that these laws are necessary if they are so inconsistent? Now, if we can use science and psychology to show that there is a universal age of consent, why can't you come to a consensus on this? Or is it because you understand that people are not made equally and would not all function the same way? But I would like to know, why does it make sense that I can buy the movie Drag Me to Hell, which is a very gory horror movie with disturbing themes and even shows kids dying, but I have to be 18 to buy another movie which is rated R, which literally just depicts two gay guys kissing with no sex whatsoever? Can you please explain to me how this makes any logical sense, considering that how irrational and inconsistent we have seen rating systems like the ESRB to be?
If roads are so complicated and magical that they can only be built by governments, then why do they hire private companies to actually build the eh? My fucking roads!
Why is every logical explanation we provide about how something will work just pure speculation, while any doomsday scenario you pull out of your ass about anarchism is absolute truth?
Now, to the statists of the left and right, who are constantly against free trade and promoting protectionism and warlike foreign trade policies, why is it that you think trade between nation states is any different from trade between states in the U.S., between Vermont and New Hampshire or Georgia and Mississippi, which we understand is a good thing because it broadens the division of labor and makes everybody better off? Why do you not see that that's also true internationally? And why do you think a solution to this non-problem is to raise taxes on the American people?
How highly do you think of yourself that you think it's your right to impose your views on people you've never met and tell them it's good for them?
If taxation isn't theft, then why do you need to use force to get people to pay their taxes, or they will be forcibly locked in a cage?
Given my first question to right-wingers and my second to left-wingers, comparing drug rights, which half of you advocate, and gun rights, which the other half of you advocate, it seems to me that there are two possible compromises. Either we go full authoritarian and none of you get what you want, or we go full libertarian and you can both have what you want. Which sounds more appealing to you? And given that answer that you gave, don't you think there are one or two other issues we could apply this reasoning to?
You keep saying I have to be moral by voting for a lesser evil this year. Could you please explain how any kind of evil is ever moral?
If you've ever said there ought to be a law, or if you believe that government is the best solution to most of life's problems, I have one question for you. Are you prepared to kill? Every law, no matter how big or small it appears to be, is backed by violent force, and in many cases, death.
When an individual's moral conscience conflicts with the commands and rules of lawmakers and law enforcers, is an individual morally obligated to do what they believe to be wrong simply to obey the law?
Listen to this ridiculousness. We protect our president with guns, but our children with paper gun-free zone signs. Congress has a 9% approval rating. Government can't even balance a budget. We are about to reach a $20 trillion debt. Social Security and Medicare and other socialist policies are unsustainable. The drug war kills more people than drugs itself. How can you say government is effective?
A major question that I have for proponents of state economic regulations in particular is how exactly can you sleep at night knowing the economic destruction that you have created? The effect of government regulations on output has been calculated to have an accumulated reduction cost on the American GDP of nearly $40 trillion just since 1949. In other words, absent of any federal economic regulations, after World War II, we could have tripled our GDP. Every citizen could have an average income of $333,000 instead of $53,000, a $277,000 increase in the average income. This doesn't even factor in the cost of compliance, rent seeking, and state-level regulations. We could have had so much more prosperity and so much less poverty without state regulations on our economy. So how can you look your opponents in the eye and claim that your regulations are somehow for the common man?
Sipping through a little glass, I'm looking for some help. I need someone to save my ass.